So we're now going to look at something that might be a little uncomfortable, the quite popular guilty dog. Now, it's quite common for us to feel like after having lived in our home for so long, dogs understand our rules and that they willfully violate it. And when caught in that action, they express guilt. And that confirms to us that they did this willfully. He knows what he did was wrong and he did it anyways. It kind of feeds into that story. But what we need to also be aware of is, one, our rules are quite arbitrary, and I'll talk about that in the next video a bit more. But also, there are studies that have looked into this, and what they show us is what we're seeing is quite unlikely a representation of a guilty conscience. It's a signaling of a guilty conscience. More likely what we're seeing is calming signals that the dog is giving because he is anticipating or he is seeing the human frustrated or angry or even disappointed. Dr. Alexander Horowitz actually did a study which involved dogs, humans, and sandwiches. So the dogs were kept in a room with a sandwich there, and the humans were sent off to another room. And then in a few cases, the dog took the sandwich and ate it, and in a few, the testers removed the sandwich. And then the dog's guardians were called back, and they were told, quite arbitrarily actually, they were either told that your dog ate the sandwich, your dog was a naughty dog, he ate the sandwich, or your dog was a good boy and he didn't eat the sandwich. And what the humans were told had nothing to do with actually what the dogs did. So they had mixed and matched those combinations. But what was interesting is that in the situations where the humans were made to believe that the dog had been a bad dog and eaten the sandwich, that's where we got the so-called guilty look. It really wasn't to do with whether the dog had eaten the sandwich or really done something that justified this feeling of guilt. So what is a better explanation is that when humans believe that their dog has done something, they are likely to be disappointed or irritated or angry even. And dogs are so good at reading us that they can see that the second you walk in through the door, and their response is probably to what they are reading in your body language, not as a consequence to what they have done, but just seeing you walk in and you looking disappointed or frustrated. And what the dog is probably giving you is calming signals. So we're going to have a look at this video. This video was sent to me by a student well before she understood this idea of calming signals. Now, I am not judging the human beings in this video at all. These people, I know for a fact, they just adore and love their dog. But this is a classic case of misinterpretation and misunderstanding between the dog and the humans. So what has happened here is that the dog has destroyed a piece of his bed, and the humans are upset about it, and they are reprimanding the dog, and the dog's guilty look is somewhat confirming their story that the dog did this willfully. But that's probably not what's going on here. It's highly unlikely that the dog has understood the economic repercussions of willfully destroying a piece of property and done it anyways to prove a point or just be naughty. What's more likely is that this is a physiological response to over-adrenalization or stress, over-excitement and things like that. And dogs can chew and tear as a coping strategy. Or it could just be an accident too. So what I'd like for you to do is watch this video. The audio has been muted on this. There will be another version of this available for you with audio, but don't look at that yet. First, observe the muted one where you get the dog's perspective on what's going on. And once you have that, then you can go back and look at the one with the human voice in it and see how different it actually looks. So let's get started. So you can see the dog blinking, frozen, lots of blinking. The whites in the eyes are showing. We didn't talk about that, but that's used as well. completely frozen, sitting. So we saw the light dog with dark eyes and the blinking and the sitting. So we're going to do one more video, but before that, if you want, you can go ahead and look at the video with audio and see how the narrative looks a little different. We have one more video. You know the drill by now. Watch the video, watch it in slow motion if you have to. The audio will be removed for this again, and make a list of the signals that you see, analyze it a little bit, and let's discuss after you watch it. What's going on here? It seems that the humans want the dog to leave that space that he's in and go to another room. And they seem to be baffled as to why the dog is not cooperating. Why is he being so adamant? And they are trying to push the dog to do this. The dog's perspective seems to be a little different. The dog may not actually be understanding why he is being asked to go somewhere else, or maybe just the pressure that is being put on him is confusing him, making him freeze, and so he's giving out calming signals, and you can see that the escalation of the signals. Now here again, I am not judging the human beings and suggesting that they're doing something wrong. I know for a fact that these guys love their dogs, but it seems to be another classic case of miscommunication. We must try and realize that the rules that we have, either for ourselves or for our dogs, are quite arbitrary. And I have a funny example that might kind of drive this point home. I read an article once about this that suggested how the toileting habits of the people in the East and the West are so significantly different that it's quite confusing actually. For example, for those of us in the East, we probably can't understand why the Western world would run out of toilet paper during a pandemic. Whereas for people from the West, if you see a Japanese toilet or an Indian toilet, maybe they're not even able to squat on it, not even know how to use it. I have sometimes seen if there's a Western toilet and there are people who are unfamiliar with it, they might end up peeing not in the toilet but close to the drain, because why would anybody imagine that this porcelain throne with a hole in it is meant for illumination? I mean, if we have traveled to other parts of the country, it's not uncommon for us to walk out of the toilet being completely confused and baffled, just not knowing how to use the whole thing. And that's interesting that even amongst our own species, our rules are so arbitrary that it doesn't translate very well. We don't understand it. There are so many times we may travel to another country and end up not understanding the rules of that culture and violating it, and being very confused as to why the locals are offended by it. And equally baffling to the people there as to why somebody would violate this rule, because it seems so sensible, so logical. But we forget that they are actually quite arbitrary. And so it's not uncommon for us to have similar expectations of our dogs who have lived with us for such a large part of their life, that we expect that they just understand these rules and it just makes sense to them like it makes sense to us. But the truth is their perspective is different, right? They may not always understand it. For example, a dog may not understand, why am I allowed in one room and not the other? Sometimes allowed in here and sometimes not. Why do humans poop in one room and poop and pee in one room and not the other? I sometimes feel like my dog Chiru looks at me with this sense of disgust, with this, ew, why would you poop and pee inside a house? It's meant to be done outside. Um, Sometimes when dogs pee in the wrong place, it could be because they don't understand the rules. But sometimes it could be just because they've had a physiological response to excitement or stress. Maybe they've been left home alone for too long and something scary happened and they just had an accident. When they chew and destroy things, it's highly unlikely that they've grasped the concept of economics, understand the monetary value of things, picked up a shoe that was most expensive and decided to chew on that just so that they could make a point to you. What's more likely is that they are over-adrenalized, overexcited, or stressed, and the chemicals in their body are changing and they're doing this as a way to cope. We do it too. When we are excited or stressed, we may chew on our nails or pen cap. I had a boss who would chew on his pen cap all the time, especially before meetings with investors. He's not violating rules to teach me a lesson. That's just a physiological response. It's the way we cope, and animals use chewing a lot more as a way to cope. If we actually understood the origin of these behaviors that is specific to a species and understood their communication from their perspective, it may paint an entirely different picture and make sense to us. And we may choose then, instead of being angry, to help them out. And it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it to take that extra effort to try and figure out where these behaviors come from. Because if we don't, they may escalate and end up biting. And the sad thing is, when they do, it further feeds into our narrative that we have a bad dog. And that's just stressful for everybody involved and can have extremely dire consequences, sometimes to humans and quite frequently to dogs.